The CEO of the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse, Wayne Duvenage, says there's what he calls a tsunami of corruption emerging in higher education. He says there's a huge number of ghost learners and fake qualifications in the system, and that in fact it's worse than the corruption we heard about during the Zondo Commission. Wayne Duvenage is the CEO at Outa. Wayne, good afternoon to you. It's quite a big claim to make, to say this is worse than what we heard during the Zondo Commission. What do you believe is happening in our higher education system?
Yeah, no, I think clarity on the Zondo Commission. I mean, the Zondo Commission just exposed so much of what was going wrong in the state capture years. Corruption hasn't ended. In fact, it's getting worse in many sectors, certainly in local government sector. But with regards to higher education, you'll recall on the NSFAS matter, which was a matter that stemmed from the services sector, by the way, where Andile Nongogo was the CEO. He became then the CEO later on at NSFAS. Took along with him a number of players that they'd introduced to channel funds, irregular procurement practices, paying 100 times the amount that you should for T-shirts and all that stuff. The typical modus operandi. This we exposed last year, and the powers that be, both the chair of the board at NSFAS and the minister, said, look, they've looked into Andile Nongogo. There's nothing untoward. Well, we were persistent in our claims. Eventually, they did an independent investigations, which Worksman's did, and Worksman found exactly what we were saying. Andile Nongogo was then dismissed, and there was instructions to terminate the contracts with a number of the suppliers. That still hasn't happened, by the way. Then we got more information from whistleblowers, and we exposed that in recordings, and now you see Ernest Khoza, the chairperson of NSFAS, has now stepped aside while these investigations carry on. And quite frankly, the fire is burning quite hot in the minister's kitchen in this regard. We've recently now been given information on irregularities that are taking place in the insurance sector, where there are ghost learners, where there is pushing people out of the organization that are getting in the way of the nefarious activities, payments to organizations that just do not qualify. So again, irregularities in the whole procurement and the payment processes. Look, Stephen, the list goes on. We join the dots. We see the same modus operandi, and it is really, really sad for us to have to now start to be dealing with things like this in other sectors.
I mean, there are various things that are happening here. And you have suggested, and Outa has suggested, that through these voice recordings, that in fact the SACP, the South African Communist Party, may well have benefited from money paid to them by companies that won tenders and contracts to do with NSFAS. Now, the SACP and the Minister, Dr. Bladen Zamande, have strongly denied that. Do you still stand by your claims? I mean, there was a very strong denial they put out.
Those were claims that were made in the recordings. We put those recordings out there for the public. We put a report out, and we said these are claims made in a discussion, which, by the way, the chairperson, Ernest Khoza, has never denied took place. In fact, the spokesperson has said on air that was the chairperson of NSFAS, having those conversations with people who had to remind him that they had paid this money over or done these services to the tune of R1 million for the SACP's conference in 2022. Now, of course, they might deny that. These are claims that person's made. I think what needs to happen now is a full forensic investigation, an independent one, into these matters, which is why we've given all this information over to the SIU, and hopefully they will get to the bottom of it. But there were a lot of damning allegations that came out of those discussions, and that's what we've put out there. But when you start joining the dots, Stephen, when you start seeing what's been happening behind the scenes, and not only there, but in services sector, and now what we see happening in sector, there's a web of nefarious activities that should not be taking place. People's lives are being affected negatively by the processes that are unfolding. People are moved out of their positions. People that are in these roles to fulfill their fiduciary duties to these companies are removed from these organizations because they're getting in the way of corruption. We need answers to these questions.
So, I mean, you talk about a web. I mean, is there some kind of one overarching syndicate or different groups just taking advantage? And, I mean, you make the point it affects lives. Higher education is one of the most important things we do.
Yeah. Look, I mean, to what extent there is a web when we see the same modus operandi applied, we start to get the sense that this is coordinated. This is not just happening haphazardly. I don't think it just stops at the board level of these organizations. There's something wrong here, and to us it looks like it goes much higher up. So we want the SIU and other investigations to get to the bottom of it, and we believe that they will in time, given the right information and given the fact that they can go and do the necessary digging. There's a whole accommodation issue that's unfolding with NSFAS for students. That is a ticking time bomb as far as we're concerned, because of the accreditation of accommodation service providers. A whole new plan put in place where lots of money will start to flow to new structures that have been set up inside these systems, which are weak, which are not fulfilling their purpose, and it's causing chaos in the accommodation sector. So the list, Stephen, it's just the mind boggles as to why this organization, which a number of years ago was sorted out, it was on track, it was providing good services and funding to students, the poor students who deserve and need these funds, to be in this mess now and for no accountability being taken by the people in leadership is a disgrace, quite frankly. And now we see service providers like GIFS being pushed aside because they're exposing corruption in NCTA, and they just get discredited. There's now a court order that's been granted to them to have them reinstated and accredited because they're providing services to learners and to companies, and NCTA is just ignoring that court order. I mean, this is absolutely outrageous.
It seems to have happened, Wayne, I mean, you talk about NSFAS, but it seems to have happened quite quickly. It was sorted out. There's a whole big issue. And suddenly we have all of this happening again.
Yeah, I think if you go back just a number of years in time, when there was the management previous to this in place, NSFAS had its challenges right in the beginning, you remember, but they sorted it out. They got the administration right, they got the payments to the students right, to the universities, to the accommodation providers. It was a fixed and working system, and along comes new management and decide to change things and stop procurement processes and put out new tenders and then start manipulating the system. That's what's happened in NSFAS. We see that happening in NCTA. We saw that happening in Services CETA. And there are other CETAs that have got serious problems related to the administration and the conduct of leadership who are getting in the way of due process. And this is a concern for us. So we will dig. We will get more and more information. We've got a lot already. And we'll be putting out a report on the NCTA matter. We'll be meeting with the authorities if they want to meet with us to hear their side of the story. But normally in the past, when we tried to engage with NSFAS, they just ignored us and fobbed us off, to their own peril.
Thank you very much indeed. Wayne Duvenage is the CEO of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse.